Chapter 115. First of all, this is not my fault, Bo. I sent my warnings out to the boater members, then I went to follow up with Laura. I aborted because she was in the process of following up with the Vilras. And it sounded like she was asking them for money in exchange for being mind-controlled, so I guess she is not as worried for herself as I was for her. Pissing off one of the richest S-ranks in the world for the sake of people who don't want help seems like a bad call, so my efforts in this matter are now complete. As long as nobody shows up at my apartment to murder me. If the next time you talk to me I say, Manon is my friend. Alaya is my new mom. Hazel and I are seeing each other, please send help. It was nearly 4 in the morning, and Alden had just gotten in bed. He couldn't decide if there was a point in trying to sleep once you were this far into the next day, but going through the motions seemed like the responsible thing to do. He read over the message, then he added, I don't think they recognized me at Laura's, so even if they know I'm involved, maybe they don't know I know they're involved. Or something. Don't worry. Detach yourself from the cat. Talk to you soon. As he was pulling the sheets up around his chin, he received a text message from Hoyu asking if he was asleep yet. I'm not, Alden replied. I don't think I can sleep. I'm going to be downstairs in the common area. Does he want company or is he just informing me because it's a weird hour? Alden wondered. He yawned. Guess I am tired. I wonder if last night's sleep even counted considering I spent a portion of it trapped in a school counselor's office with the system. His white noise machine was lulling him with fan sounds. His bed was exactly the right temperature. He tried to think of how to phrase a text so that Hoyu would know he was willing to stay up but not necessarily eager to do it. Alden closed his eyes. Maybe. 6 hours later, he woke to sunlight seeping around the edges of his curtains. He debated the merits of just staying in bed for the rest of the day. When was the last time he'd had a completely lazy Sunday? Is that even a thing I can do anymore? Keeping busy had been a coping mechanism since the moment he arrived in intake. And there was plenty to keep busy with. He braced himself and checked his inbox. No messages from the boater. No accusations or questions. Nothing. Maybe I really am done with that shit? Emotionally he was anyway. Finally. He'd done what he set out to do. If anything else happened because of it, he'd just have to react when it came up. Did that mean he could eat unhealthy food and lie in bed until Monday? Well, there's some unavoidable prep work for gym tomorrow. And Luke wanted to go out with the girls. He might not be in the mood for that after last night, though. Fine. But the comfort food is happening no matter what. He put on his flannel pajama pants and his slouchiest t-shirt to solidify his intentions to be a normal lazy guy on a normal lazy Sunday. When he exited his room, the apartment was quiet. Just me and you, Sonny? Alden asked the polar bear head. He stretched his arms, smiled, and placed it in order from a diner he'd spotted a couple of weeks ago. It was a retro postcard of a restaurant, aqua vinyl seats, chrome detailing everywhere, and a jukebox playing pre-contract hits. Not much like the neighborhood diner he'd frequented with Bo and Jeremy. But he'd read the menu online, and it was hitting all the right nostalgia points. He set himself up at the kitchen table with his laptop to wait on the arrival of his feast. When Hoyu entered the apartment an hour later with a basket full of laundry in his arms, Alden was just tucking into a mountain of golden hash browns with onions 2 ways, some caramelized and others cut into thin slivers and batter fried for extra crunch. There were sauces. He was happy. Then he looked at his roommate. Hoyu didn't look as cheerful as usual. Hoyu? Sorry about earlier. I fell asleep in the middle of texting you to tell you I was sleepy. It's fine. I figured it was something like that. Do you want some hash browns? Hoyu started to shake his head, then he eyed the tall mound in front of Alden. Maybe. Let me set this down. He returned without the laundry basket. Several bites of potato and quite a lot of the sticky sweet miso ketchup sauce disappeared into his mouth before he said, would it be wrong to buy a car and hit Luke's family members with it? I understand the sentiment, but that would be murder. His roommate stuffed another forkful of potatoes in his mouth. But is murder always wrong? He muttered. It depends on which species you ask. We humans tend to think it is. Hoyu stabbed the potato mountain. What they did to him was despicable. And I don't even mean the eye, although that's bad enough. Of course I wondered why he hadn't replaced it, but I thought maybe he was scared of having a bionic implanted. Since that's not it, there's obviously some added complication for injuries sustained while Alaya was polluting causality on a nationwide scale. Global, said Alden. What? It's not like I understand it, but the gloss probably has global impacts. You were eavesdropping, so you heard me mention. Hoyu was blinking at him. Maybe you didn't catch that part, Alden said awkwardly. And? Now it's weird if I don't explain. During the first half of the luck chain, someone traded a B-rank chainer class assignment to me right before I was scheduled to come here for Hannah Elber's funeral. Getting that class for Hazel was the main reason for the gloss. The person who had received chainer from the system wasn't here on Anzidora, and neither was I. Lute's family basically jumped me the second I landed, and by the end of the day, I had 1.5 million Argold. You should have asked for more, Hoyu said flatly. You should have bankrupted them. I asked for way less than that. My sense of what these things were worth wasn't great. Even if I'd been trying to hurt the Blurs monetarily, I think I would have undershot it. If it works on a global scale, then she sucks even more, Hoyu said emphatically. Whenever anyone does something like that, it makes Avowed look bad. When one of Anzidora's leaders does it, he's an emotional eater. Alden watched Hoyu shovel more fried potatoes into his mouth. He was glad he'd ordered an indulgent quantity. Lute's mom and his grandmother. Hoyu was speaking between bites. When he was telling the story, he was saying things like, I should have expected them to trick me after everything else, right? I was stupid to trust them even a little. And I was just sitting there thinking, no, you weren't stupid. You were at a vulnerable point in your life and they took advantage of you. They are monsters, and you should get a restraining order. He stabbed the potatoes again. But you can't say something like that about another person's family if they haven't said it themselves, can you? I know Lute hates Alaya, but I don't think he blames his mom nearly as much as he should. I was so furious about it I couldn't sleep. And he only slept 2 or 3 hours. He took off early this morning saying he had something to do, but I bet it was because he was still upset from seeing her yesterday. And Hoyu doesn't even know what she was doing when we saw her. Alden slid another plastic cup full of sauce across the table. It's not simple to comment on other people's family situations, he agreed. They are so personal, and there's no way for you to see it from the inside. He had never once appreciated an outsider saying something harsh about his aunt, even if he was angry about the exact same things they were judging her for. I went to a pre-selection advice session in 8th grade, Hoyu said. After Lute had left school. He transferred to CNH really fast after taking chainer. I'm not sure it was even a standard acceptance window for arts students. Now that I've heard his story, I wonder if he wasn't just trying to get into a dorm and away from them all as fast as possible. At the session, there was a panel of people telling their own selection stories, and one of them said the only choice more life-altering than your class was who you married. And Three-Eyed Rhoda, they really did have some cool people connected to their school, thought Alden. Three-Eyed Rhoda was a famous adjuster who could cast deconstructive spells on things from miles away as long as she had seen and marked them in the past few hours. Said marriage was so much less serious. You can't divorce a class. You can't have a talk with it and ask it to change how it treats you. You can't go stay in another room to get some alone time. It's part of you. I think the other panelists thought she was putting too much pressure on us because they tried to tone it down with what they said next. But it's still true. I don't get to unbe a brute now. If I ever have doubts, I'll just remind myself that I took my time and made the best decisions I could. And even if I got tons of help from other people making up my mind, they were completely my decisions. Lute doesn't get to have that. He's not wrong. I almost said something myself, Alden admitted. I wanted to comment on how twisted it was that they woke him up in the middle of the night to do it. I know. Hoyu lowered his voice. That was Being yanked out of bed like that? There was absolutely no reason for it except to confuse him and make him feel like it was urgent. Like making a decision right then and there was an emergency. If they'd waited and had a calm conversation about it in the morning, he wouldn't have freaked when Alaya pointed out that Hazel could still get us any minute and take the opportunity away. He knew it was unlikely, but they had set him up to panic in every way they could. They both fell quiet. "These are really good potatoes," Hoyu said finally. "Did I eat half your breakfast?" "They are good. Don't worry about it. I ordered more than I could handle on my own anyway." Hoyu sighed. "And the gloss didn't do him any favors here at CNH. Khan was telling me about it yesterday. A girl's pet died in class while the word chain was in effect." "Whoa, wait. I was under the impression the art kids didn't like Loot because he thinks he's better than them at a ton of stuff and he doesn't. Make efforts to hide it. They also seem to think he's using luck magic to cheat at auditions or something like that." Hoyu nodded. "I heard he called one of the most popular third years a hack, and he tested out of all the high school music theory classes because he knew how many nose hairs Mozart had or something." "That sounds likely," thought Alden. But about the pet story, according to Khan, there was a right girl Loot had a really obvious crush on, and her friend had a pet alien that she was allowed to carry with her to classes because coaxing it into laying eggs was a project that had been approved by one of her instructors. It looked like a guinea pig crossed with a platypus, and it was the mascot of one of the biggest first-year science classes. They even had a pet feed that played at the front of the room beside the instructor's lecture notes. That sounds completely adorable. I don't like where this is going for the platypig. You definitely don't. On the first day of the gloss, someone got distracted while they were using a skill, and even though they were all the way across the lecture hall, the effect hit the platypig. Alden slapped his hands to his ears and shook his head. "Nope. That's enough. No mental images. The platypig is no longer with us," Hoyu said simply. "How was that good luck for Luke?" He was sitting right there, and he was comforting the pet owner. He wrapped the body of the deceased up in a scarf so that she wouldn't have to see it. The girl he was crushing on thought his handling of the incident was gentlemanly, I guess. So she asked him out. He must have realized what was going on, and he turned her down. Then when people found out about the gloss and did the math, it could have been a coincidence, Alden said in a doubtful voice. Nobody can prove it wasn't. Hoyu's tone was equally doubtful. And he didn't do it. It sounds like Alaya performs the gloss, and she just takes the rest of the family along for the ride whether they want to go or not. Everyone knows that. Or at least suspects it. But if you think about how many things moved to make that one girl suddenly think Loot was dateable when she hadn't thought it before, it is uncomfortable. They are probably going to try to make it illegal now that Alaya is off the High Council. For her to cast that word chain? Alden asked. Dad thinks so. They've tried a few times, but it's never gotten off the ground. Power bands are so unpopular. And Alaya is always finding examples of things the past two gloss uses might have been responsible for that were good instead of bad. Luke needs to go on a character repair campaign. Hoyu was taking in the rest of the scene at the table. Alden's laptop was there, and strands of paracord, looped and tied in different ways, lay beside it. You were trying to prep for gym, or single quote you. And I sat down and vented at you. I'm sorry. I just want to run over some villas with a car. That. Alden smiled. It's fine. I was finalizing my tool choice. You were going with the cord, then. I am, said Alden. I massaged Foxball since she's in charge of approving it, and she just got back to me before you walked in. She says even though they're limiting me, they'll let me be flexible within the category of weapon I've chosen. Any type of rope or line, varying weights on the end, different carrying methods, things like that. He looked down at the loops of cord he'd tied. I'm glad to be practicing with it. I've thought of things I want to try for defense, maneuvering, and rescue. For offense, I've maybe got an idea. If we're still playing Kill Klein. I heard from one of the second years that he's still doing that game with them a lot. Apparently, once a few people actually managed to lay hands on him, he ups the difficulty. I want to make him use more of the gym at least. It's disheartening to be in a 10-on-1 battle where the one doesn't even have to run very far. The instant corner skill is phenomenal, Hoyu agreed. I knew it would be. I've seen it a ton watching Brute Arena because S-Rank just love it. But actually being face to face with someone using it is something else. You're always thinking, yes, I've got him now. Nope, not even close. I asked Mom what to do about it. What did she say? Alden asked. She said I need to think more about basics instead of combating specific skills at this point. She thinks I should focus on learning to read tells. Like in poker? He nodded. Most people have a tell or two associated with their skills. Lots of them are deliberate actions, to get the user in the right frame of mind. But some are accidents. For boxing gloves, I didn't want to start high school having to say activate boxing gloves out loud because that's a little embarrassing. So I practiced until I could do it without that, but I started automatically clenching my fists every time. I'm working on stopping it. So Klein probably has a tell when he is about to use instant corners. Alden fully intended to find it and use it against him. Well, lots of professional heroes get rid of their known ones as ruthlessly as they can. They'll even hire sways to help them ditch whatever the habit is. But Mom says even if he's gotten rid of his real tells, he's probably showing off fake ones for teaching purposes. She says Big Snake should be, too, in the offense sessions, to train our eyes. Alden took the last bite of the hash browns then shoved the to-go container aside. I wonder what my own tells are. I doubt I have one when I'm just preserving something, but maybe when I'm about to activate or deactivate the preservation? We can study our footage from gym together and try to find each other's habits if you want. I do. Alden stared down at the paracord he'd been practicing speed tying. Maybe not today. I was trying to have a lazy Sunday and I've already come up with 6 weekends worth of tasks for myself. And that's just related to learning to use rope. I've always wanted to lasso someone. I just watched a video of someone using a lasso. I'm pretty sure I could get a cow with one after some practice, but instructor Klein doesn't move at cow speed. Hoyu laughed. What if cows moved at Klein's speed? I'd head to a safer planet. It was 2 more hours before Luke came home. When he arrived, Alden and Hoyu were both working in their bedrooms at their desks with their doors open. And periodically, "Are you two mooing at each other?" Luke asked from the hall. "No," said Hoyu in a completely neutral voice. "Of course not. Why would we be?" Alden was doing a much worse job of keeping a straight face. "I'm practicing my new word chain signs. And trying to figure out how to make useful supplies really fast out of court. We're both being product." "Moo," said Hoyu. Alden cracked up, and Hoyu was only a second behind him. Luke stared from one of them to the other. "How did you get this weird this fast?" "I was only gone a few hours." "We were talking about cows with superpowers," said Alden. "Did you get lunch?" Hoyu asked. Alden just ordered a bunch of pastries from a vegan bakery. "No," Luke said. "I've been really busy." "Alden, are you continuing Operation Cottontail?" Alarmed, Alden shoved his chair away from his desk, rolling backward in it until he could see Luke more clearly. He was standing with his back to the opposite wall in the hall so that he could talk to them both at the same time. "What's Operation Cottontail?" Hoyu asked. "Nah, man," said Alden. "After yesterday, I'm satisfied. Good deed done. The only thing I missed out on was that one convo, and clearly that one convo wasn't going to go well. And, you know, your mother was there. Almost definitely working for your grandma. I'm not going anywhere near that again. I'm having a lazy Sunday." "You were practicing your self-mastery word chain when I walked in," Luke pointed out. "That's lazy for me. There are fruit tarts coming. And cookies covered in dark chocolate." "Hello," Hoyu said. Alden heard his desk chair rolling, and a moment later he had wheeled himself out into the hall beside Luke. "What kind of operation?" "A completed one. But it was something worthy of a code name." "No." Luke gave it a code name on his. Luke interrupted them. I was just checking in case you wanted more information. There was a long pause. Lute was watching him. Hoyu's head was whipping from one of them to the other like he might be able to decipher the situation if he read their expressions fast enough. I want to eat cookies, Alden said. It took you a long time to decide. Cookies. Lute shrugged. Anyway, I was just going to tell you that during the course of Operation Odin's Revenge this morning, I pursued one of our suspects. There are suspects? Hoyu exclaimed. And she had a very similar conversation to the one we overheard last night with another person who is presumably a member of that group you were interested in. So this is just Odin letting Cottontail know. In case he needs to know. Dude, said Alden, what the heck are you doing? You inspired me. Lute held a hand to his chest. And then our talk last night inspired me even more. Operation Odin's Revenge is my new hobby. Its goal is singular, but difficult. I am going to get the Grand Witch arrested. For some illegal thing she's done. Somehow. Alden stared at him. Hoyu stared at him. Sonny stared at all three of them from behind his hot pink sunglasses. That's craze. Can't I help? Hoyu? Alden protested. Of course you can, Hoyu, said Lute. I don't have permission to tell you about Alden's completed operation, but mine isn't really going to intersect with his anyway. That's what I decided this morning. It's too hard to pin crimes on Alaya through those people, Alden. She'll just shift the blame to the mini-crime lord, won't she? Plus, a big organized group of people being involved in the crimes being at least partially conducted on the true planets makes it too complicated. Alden assumed Manon was the mini-crime lord. But since I'm sure Alaya's doing other terrible things, I'm going to find one and get proof. And tell everybody. He smiled in satisfaction. Hoyu looked extremely intrigued. Alden didn't see how this could possibly be his fault, but it felt like it was his fault. Okay, he said slowly. I support your desire to imprison your grandmother. But how serious are you about this? Because it sounds pretty dangerous, and you should value your own life. We only get one. Don't die doing something that's not worth it. And don't take risks you wouldn't want your friends to take with you. I'm so glad Bo isn't here to hear me trying to paraphrase him right now. Why are they looking at me like that? Hoyu looked like he'd just seen the world's cutest puppy. And Luke looked like he'd run across the same puppy when it was doing something dumb, attacking its own reflection in a puddle maybe. Alden, you're really worried about him. You've been mooing at him for too long, said Lute. It's made him nervous. I'm talking about exploring locked closets in my own former homes and talking to my own relatives. I'm not going to die. Alden felt incredibly embarrassed for a few seconds, and then slightly less so as he reassessed the threat level. Wait. You guys, it was an overly strong warning, but I do have a point. Luke's grandmother isn't going to be happy if she figures out what he's doing, and, good, said Lute. No. Not good. What happens if she gets really mad at you? Alden said. Not my grandson is annoying Emmy single quote mad, but Lute is a legitimate threat to my freedom mad. She could seriously fuck up your life. No, Lute said dryly. You think so? I think you're really angry, Alden said. You should be. But you should still think for more than a few hours before you go against the Anisidran Mafia, and you should value your life and all that other stuff I just said. It was fine advice. I don't think we're quite worthy of being called a mafia. Hoyu looked at Alden curiously. What the heck did you guys do without me yesterday? You know what, I'm not going to talk about it out loud. I will text you. From now on, all conversations about this sort of thing happen in privacy booths or in our heads. Alden, look. Here. Talk here if you're going to take on the mafia together on a nice Sunday afternoon when there are baked goods coming. Wow. You really are one of the fastest mental texters I've ever seen, said Hoyu. That was an entire paragraph. With a custom font. That's the annoyed font. You're including yourself in the group chat, too, though, Luke pointed out. That's because I care about what happens to you, stupid. Don't run off half-cocked because I led you into a crazy situation yesterday and accidentally exposed you to That emotional dynamite. Actually, said Hoyu, even though I want to run over your grandmother with a car, you do? We were talking about it earlier. But even though I want that, I do agree with Alden that you should be careful. What was your plan anyway? My plan was, Alden, put it in the chat. This chat. Right here. They both blinked at him, then lifted their hands to start typing. Alden sighed and let his neck fall back to stare up at the ceiling. I'm trying to turn over a new leaf here. And now Loot wants to put Aliyah in prison. Personally. He tried to think of how he would ever explain this to Bo if he got involved. It might not actually count under our copycat heroics agreement since Loot's motivation is revenge and mine would be, Hoyu. Operation Odin's Revenge is a fun name. I need a coda name. Can I pick it myself? Loot, my plan doesn't actually sound that great now that you're making me write it out. I don't think I really know how to buy a device that will silently blast a hole in the wall of Aliyah's office. I'm sure it's shielded like the panic room and the other safe spaces. Loot, and I get to pick the coda names. You can pick the coda names for your own operations. Hoyu, I want to help, but I don't want to do anything actually illegal, alright? My parents would be surprised if I shot someone's office with a magic cannon. But not in a good way. Our activities need to be more moderate than that. Alden, I would like to remind Loot that he made fun of me just yesterday for having a mission. I would also like to point out that people trying to sneakily search multiple private locations probably shouldn't leave giant holes behind them to let everyone know where they've been. Loot, so you're helping, Cottontail. Alden rolled his eyes. He got a little more work done while the two of them texted each other spy plans. They were both toning it down and down again as they talked, so he was feeling a lot less concerned that Loot was about to do something crazy. The bakery delivery arrived, and while he went downstairs to fetch it, he scrolled through the chat. It looked like Loot had decided on a much more gradual fact-finding approach. He was talking about attending more family gatherings and actually paying attention to the shit while he was at them instead of avoiding everyone. Loot, I'll need to make it look like I want something from Aliyah. So she won't be as suspicious. It sounds dreadful. Maybe we should reconsider the merits of blowing things up. Alden carried the bakery box back up to the apartment, sniffing it more than was necessary. Hey, he said, when he walked in. Snacks. Hoyu sprang up from the sofa, and Loot wasn't far behind him. Alden grabbed a miniature cherry tart and ate it, watching Loot thoughtfully. I'll go with you, he said. Loot was licking the lemon coconut filling out of his own tart shell. What? I'll go with you to a vlog party. You know Aliyah would love it. Alden, I'm not going to do anything illegal or explosive either. But I could be a good distraction for your grandmother if you wanted to sneak around and talk to other people without her paying attention to you. No, said Loot. I can't ask you to do that. I know you're trying really hard to avoid her and her brand of crazy. I am. I was even nervous about being roommates with you because I was afraid I'd get sucked into the vortex. Loot looked away uncomfortably. Hoyu had stopped chewing his cookie. Weird, right? Said Alden. I was so worried about it. And now, a couple of weeks later, I think you're the person I know best on all of Nzidora. Loot's head whipped around again. He looked taken aback. Alden shrugged. Well, you are. I haven't been here long. I've gotten to know a lot of nice people who I hope I can get to know even better. But you and I have spent a ton of time together. And you're fun as hell to hang out with even if you're just spending 6 straight hours tutoring me. You are an excellent friend. So yeah. Sign me up for a tasteless rich person event where Aliyah tries to read the lines on my palms. It'll be fun in its own way if we're all doing it together, right? Right, Loot said, his surprised expression gradually turning into a smile. Family parties should be a lot more fun with friends. Is there one tonight? Alden asked. No. Then let's put it out of our minds for now, said Alden. Didn't you want to do something with the girls this afternoon? It's getting late. Hoyu, you want to come, too, right? Loot was still smiling happily at his pastry. What? Oh. I didn't plan anything at all. I wanted to, and then. You mentioned something in passing last night that I was really curious about, so I'm sure they will be too. What? You said there was a magic roller coaster? Alden asked. I'm going to need to see that. Chapter 116 The rooftop-to-rooftop coaster in F-City was part sightseeing experience, part thrill ride, part ode to magical engineering. It was also very popular. Even though they bought tickets the second Alden expressed an interest, they still ended up with time slots staggered over the course of 2 hours. People rode the coaster in pairs, and before they left the apartment, Luke tried to establish elaborate social plans to ensure that he could ride with Elijah without it seeming unnatural. Don't you think this Heidiza would rather ride with one of her friends instead of me? Hoyu protested. It'll be weird to walk up to them with established boy-girl roller coaster partners in mind already. Like we're trying hard to make it a date. I agree, Alden said. Why don't I ride with Hoyu? Natalie and Heidiza can ride together. And then you and Elijah can still pair up. Lute, who was leaning toward the bathroom mirror and doing things to his hair with pomade, said, fine. But I don't think it sounded that strange. Apparently, neither did the girls. Almost as soon as they met up and Lute explained about the roller coaster, they suggested dividing the group exactly as he had hoped with zero prompting. He kept shooting knowing looks at Alden and Hoyu as if to say, see. I understand these things. The building where people boarded the coaster had ground floor shops to browse while they waited for everyone to have their turn. Your friend likes Elijah, Heidiza observed as she, Alden, Hoyu, and Natalie wandered the aisles of a store that sold mostly paper and art supplies. Alden hastily massaged Hoyu. What are we supposed to say? Hoyu gave him a blank look, then pointed at the shelf and said, Rehab single quote T wrapping paper. You don't see that every day. Good idea. Distraction. I've held a Rehab single quote T before, Alden announced. She was awesome. Lute talked to her in Lithuanian, Natalie said, giggling. Heidiza was nodding. He said she was beautiful. Elijah said his pronunciation was pretty good. Well, all right then, thought Alden, trying not to feel offended on other Alden's behalf. Apparently I'm the only one who thinks holding a miniature dragon is a more noteworthy conversation topic. Hoyu's mouth had dropped open. Lute did do that, Alden confirmed via text. He'd performed a self-confidence word chain. I told him not to try it again today. What if he thought he could ride the coaster without a safety harness? Just then, he spotted a pack of dark, jewel-toned origami paper. Are you buying that? Natalie asked when he picked it up. He flipped it over to check the price. The back of the paper was gold. Yeah, I think I will. If you learn to make things out of it, make me something. She said brightly. Sure. What do you want? Surprise me. Their turn to ride came not long after that. They boarded their car on the roof of the building after receiving a brief safety lecture about how they'd probably explode, fall, and die if they tried to zap the ride vehicle with their powers. So much for trying to make a roller coaster taste delicious, Natalie joked as the oddly large and squishy lap bar lowered. Alden was about to ask her if she'd ever actually tried to cook something inedible before when the lap bar and the seat distracted him by melting slightly and molding themselves around him. Natalie was blinking down at her legs. Are the seats hugging us? They're huggers, Alden confirmed. That wasn't in the safety elect. Without so much as a countdown or a green light and warning, the car shot forward and over the edge of the roof. They plummeted straight down 10 stories, Natalie shrieking and Alden gripping the lap bar, which molded helpfully around his hands when he placed them on top. Then they slowed, to a float rather than a stop. Heart racing, it took Alden a second to appreciate the fact that he was hanging off the side of a skyscraper. They were facing forward, the back of their car having caught the track during the vertical drop, and he felt nearly weightless thanks to some magical effect. Laughing excitedly, Natalie nudged him with an elbow. Your hair. Your hair, Alden replied. The blonde strands were drifting around in the air over her head. A second later, they dropped again, and then they shot forward along a completely invisible section of track that Alden assumed existed since it still sounded like they were riding a coaster and not a coaster car that had turned into an aerial vehicle. "This is the best," Natalie shouted, throwing her hands up into the air. It really was. The ride took them up, down, and across from rooftop to rooftop. It was lengthened by a couple of slow spots, another pause to take in the city skyline, and a journey over a particularly gorgeous series of climate-controlled gardens where they could wave at the people below them. And it was enhanced in ways that regular roller coasters couldn't hope to mimic. At one point, the car seemed to jump from one building to the next in a tall arcade like a frog leaping between lily pads. Alden had no idea if they really had hopped or if it was some illusory effect set into the track. When they made it back to the start and climbed from the car, he said, "They need to do this to all the roofs in the city." "A whole rooftop theme park," she agreed. Back downstairs, they found everyone in a fast fashion shop. Elijah and Hadaizah were discussing something by a dressing room door, and when Natalie went over to see what they were talking about, Hoyu caught Alden's eye. "Luke's letting them pick outfits for him," Hoyu said, gesturing toward the girls. "They are taking it very seriously. They are trying so hard to get him things that will fit him without looking too out there. They clearly haven't seen his closet. Should we tell them he's making a vest for himself out of tape? I think we should just throw the most unusual clothes we can find in there and see if he can make it work." "I like that plan," said Alden, eyeing a pair of pants that had been decoratively splattered with a substance that looked like grape jelly. Line of asterisks. Alden made it back to campus just in time to attend the B-list gym session. Instructor Plim, sitting in the center of the floor in her yellow raincoat just like last time, listened to his questions about what he should be focused on for the next few weeks, while other B-ranks who were hoping to talk to the club advisor hovered at Alden's back, eager for their turns. "I can't believe they are limiting you to a single type of tool when there are so many fascinating things we could do with you. Not that I'm criticizing them. Have they no curiosity? Not that you growing in competency with a tool type isn't important, too. Ding. Ding. She wants to take you to her lab and make you preserve every material in the known universe," Francis the Sway whispered. Instructor Plim waved him away. "If you must use rope-type things and you have only a few weeks before the end of term, then I think you should research similar tools and weapons and come up with ways your skill can shore up their weaknesses or take advantage of their unique properties. Take, for example, the sling." After a brief practice period, Alden carried his gym suit to the on-site laundry. There were a couple of normal washers and dryers, but they were almost never used. The cleaning cabinets set into the walls, on the other hand, were in use all the time. Max was there, dressing one of the headless, shiny silver humanoid torsos that emerged from the cabinets when you told them you wanted to start a cleaning cycle. "Someone's suit is on the floor," Alden noted, pausing for a moment to examine the dark gray fabric before he stepped around it. There was a rule about not doing anything at all with or to suits that didn't belong to you, and while he thought picking it up and setting it on a table wouldn't count, he wasn't completely sure. He couldn't forget the warning he'd been given during assessment day about Principal Sleyca phasing through the wall of someone's bedroom in the dead of night to recover a missing suit. "It's Jeffy's," Max said in an annoyed tone. "How can you tell? Do you have our body sizes memorized that precisely? Have you been spying on Jeffy today?" Alden thought it would be amusing to say these things, but Max looked kind of tired, so he refrained. "Because the second I saw a valuable piece of magical equipment lying on the floor, I wondered who would be that big of an idiot. And for some reason, my roommate's face immediately sprang to mind. So I texted him and asked if, perchance, he knew where his suit was." "You're the first person I've ever heard use the word perchance in real life. I respect that." Max sealed the suit around the silver torso as Alden summoned a dress-up body of his own from a cabinet nearby. It emerged from the wall with a set of pegs. He hung his neck, wrist, and ankle cuffs on those. "The superlatives had their own club gym time this morning," Max said. "Jeffy says he left his suit in one of the cabinets afterward because he didn't want to wait through the cleaning cycle. He thought he'd just pick it up tomorrow before our class. Tomorrow night. Apparently. Someone got mad about him hogging the cabinet, Alden concluded. People in the larger classes and clubs sometimes stand around for half an hour or more waiting their turn, so I'm sure seeing a cabinet permanently occupied annoyed them. But whoever did it is an even bigger idiot than Jeffy. If one of the faculty walks in and sees it there before he gets over here to pick it up, the hothead who actually messed with it will be in more trouble than the asshole who left it in the cleaner. Max lifted his hand like he was going to slap the button that would start the cleaning cycle, then he paused and pressed it gently instead. He stalked over to sit down on one of the benches by the door. Alden started his own cleaning cycle, then went to join him. You seem tense, he noted. Max was staring at the gym suit on the floor. Jeffy's a nice enough guy, he said. He just doesn't think. Or he thinks so hard about all the wrong things, it leaves no room in his skull for anything else. And it's annoying to be reminded that he can screw up in so many ways, so many times and still be the right kind of person for this school on the first try when I had to spend half a year turning myself inside out to become interesting enough for them to let me in. At the moment, Jeffy sprinted into the laundry room wearing a short bathrobe and sneakers without socks. His hair had shampoo bubbles in it. Max sighed. Line of asterisks. When they woke up on Monday morning, Lexi was back. He was drinking black coffee and cracking an egg into a bowl of Hoyu's latest attempt at oatmeal. Is that good? Alden asked, watching him whisk the raw egg into the steaming oats with a fork. I like it. There's an animal cafe that just opened and they have chickens that wander around under the tables. Astrid had told Alden about it. You can hold them. Lexi squinted at him. I'm going to go, Alden said, spooning nutritional yeast into his own oatmeal bowl. Soon. Why are you telling me this? Obviously because he's inviting you to go to the animal cafe with him. Lute was yawning as he entered the room. He thinks time spent with woodland creatures would be good for you. The egg just reminded me of it. But you can come. Everyone can come. And if one of the chickens looks like it wants to be held, let me know so that I can hold it. Chickens laid eggs. If a chicken came to Alden and happened to lay an egg, it would be like he'd been given the egg. He could then eat it and prove once and for all that eggs should be on his menu. Whether the cafe allowed you to take home souvenirs from their chickens or not was irrelevant. If he got his hands on an edible egg, it was going to be his even if he had to buy the whole restaurant. Lexi. Hoyu said as he bounced in. You're back. Let me invite you to our group chat. I'm already in the roommate chat. This is a separate one. For business. Lute gave Hoyu a thumbs up. Operation Odin's Revenge. Since Alden had originally created the chat, he had to approve the invite. Wondering how this was going to go over, he did. Lexi Roberts has joined the group chat for insane things nobody else ever needs to know about. Lute, I get to make up your coda name. Hoyu, Lute thinks there will probably be something for his Uncle Benjamin's birthday this week. He's going to invite himself to that. At least one of us should go for backup. Lexi frowned and started scrolling back to see what all of this was about. Why does Alden keep insisting that he'll only be a socializer instead of someone who breaks into locked rooms? Lexi asked. What is this? His frown deepened. He looked at Lute, then Hoyu, then Alden. Lexi Roberts has left a group chat for insane things nobody else ever needs to know about. Hey, said Hoyu. Your coda name is Betrayer, said Lute. Are you really not going to help? Hoyu asked. It's important. I don't see how it could be. We're doing it to help Lute and better our homeland. And nothing illegal is happening. We've agreed. Nothing's going to blow up. Nobody's getting hit with cars. This is mostly about roommate solidarity, Hoyu insisted. I'm inviting you again. While I was gone for the weekend, you all decided to go into politics? Lexi said. Was it that boring around here? It was actually a very exciting weekend, said Lute. You guys have fun going to awful parties and listening to awful people talk about awful things. I'll be doing homework. And training. And sleeping 8.5 hours a night. Hoyu sighed. If you feel that way, I understand. I guess if we ever do need a fourth man for some reason, we could ask Constantine to help us. Lexi Roberts has joined the group chat for insane things nobody else ever needs to know about. Just so that I can keep an eye on all of you, he muttered. Line of asterisks. The morning passed uneventfully. Alden attended classes, then he spent his lunch break in his room, practicing his new word chain. The gremlin was being a helper now, unintentionally. Alden had gotten good enough at the chain to interest it, so whenever he made a significant mistake and that interest dropped suddenly, he knew he had a problem. It wasn't as good as having Luke standing over him, identifying what the problem was and correcting it, but it was definitely something. As usual, he skipped his 3 o'clock formal study hall. On his way back to the dorm, he ran into Maricel. She was listening to music on a pair of earbuds that matched the pink streaks in her pixie cut, and she didn't notice him until he was walking right beside her. "Good music?" he asked, when she pulled a bud out and smiled at him. "It's a group Tayet said she enjoyed, so I thought I'd try it. When I listen to the songs my friends and I used to sing along with back home." She straightened her back. "Anyway. Yes. I do like it. Are you on your way to class?" "I'm supposed to be in study hall." "We must have the same one," said Alden. "I didn't know. I've never gone to it." "I've been going to all of them," Maricel said. "Because Vandy goes. But I think I do my homework better in the room. And today I'm going to watch other ground shapers practice at Earthbox. Instructor Fragment recommended it." Alden had gotten the impression that their rescue instructor and Maricel were getting along particularly well. "Congrats again on being the gym MVP last week." Hoyu was excited about eating Filipino food on Friday. "I think he might order the whole menu." "I don't know if I deserved that," she said. "I think Fragment might have encouraged the other teachers to pick me. Because I showed a lot of improvement. But I only did because she kept pulling me aside more than everyone else to explain specific shaping techniques to me and talk about all the ways you can use them to help people. It was so nice of her, but maybe, I don't think there's anything wrong with that," Alden cut in. "The instructors are all going to have more to say about their own subclasses because they understand them best of all. Eventually, everyone will run into a faculty member who matches up with them. Except for me, obviously. And you still had to do the work to take advantage of the advice. Fragment seems straightforward. She wouldn't pick you if you hadn't really impressed her." Maricel glanced away, her smile turning embarrassed. "I am glad about it. I've eaten at that restaurant at least twice a week since coming here. The owner's going to be so excited to have the whole class." Alden wanted to ask Maricel Alcantara a lot of things. Was she still thinking about getting summoned off the island? How was she doing really? Was the fake it till you make it thing she was trying working for her? Was she liking the hero program more than she had thought she would since she'd been excelling? His questions would only satisfy his own curiosity, not help her in any way he could see. "I think I should try to be a little more like I used to be while I still can." That was how she had put it. "I like the hair," he said. "You look cool." She reached up to touch it. "You have to say that to me all the time, don't you? It keeps changing. It keeps changing in cool ways." Chopped off by knife guy was the most impressive, but I can't remember his name either, Maricel whispered. "I've been calling him hair-cutting boy greater than in my head. A surprisingly large number of people just call me Rabbit to my face, so at least we're not that bad." He said goodbye to her right after that since they were heading in different directions. As he watched her go, she stopped to levitate a piece of a paver that had cracked and come loose, no doubt thanks to some overpowered footfall, back into its proper position. "I think she's doing all right," thought Alden, while she smashed the damaged block into place with her telekinesis. She did it too hard, and it sank an inch more than it should have. Looking around sheepishly, she pulled it back up until it was properly leveled. His roommate chat window opened suddenly. "Hoyu, Alden, will you check on the minestrone in my slow cooker? I think I left out salt." "Lexi, it's fine. I told you it was fine when I stopped by the room earlier." "Loot, he can't trust you." You think club soda has plenty of flavor. Alden went back to the apartment and checked the minestrone, which was fine. Then he grabbed the individual isopop molds he'd bought from the kitchen supply store Natalie had pulled them all into yesterday, along with a bag of jumbo marshmallows and a jug of fruit punch. What more could a wizard need? He locked his bedroom door, shut the blackout curtains, and went to the corner to kneel on his knockoff learning cushion. He cast all the spells he knew one by one, starting with the promise stick lighting spell. Not being in possession of actual promise sticks, he cast it on the cedar-scented jar candle he'd bought in hopes of mimicking the smell of the burning wood. In his head, he promised Kibby he would be a good learning partner and do his sincere best. After he'd gone through his small repertoire of hands-only spells, he took his ori out from its place around his neck. When he started to loop it around his fingers, he felt anticipation. He always did. But today it was tinged a little more than usual with an unwelcome melancholy. Alden wasn't sure what the cause was. When he tried to find the problem, it wasn't like he could point at any one thing and say, "That's bad." He tossed a pillow across the room with a square strike. Then he smashed a mound of marshmallows into a perfect disc with a press spell. It was satisfying. And safe. They just blobbed together, no shrapnel. If he made his pile large enough or aimed slightly differently, he could make sure some of the marshmallows got sliced in half by being left partially out of the crush zone. He didn't trust his own shielding abilities enough to crush anything more dangerous here in the apartment. The spell never let anything fly back at the caster as far as he could tell. It all went directly away from him every time. Still, trying something crazy like a big hunk of steel or a glass sphere didn't seem like the neighborly thing to do. Hoyu was making a lot of his slow cooker meals vegan. Alden couldn't repay him by embedding metal shards in the wall between their rooms. Next, he used his flash freezing spell to make a couple of fruit punch pops. He'd hoped to be able to do more, but on the second pop he started to feel the strain on his free authority combined with that sense of resistance from the world around him that meant he'd hit his limit. He checked the time and saw that he still had an hour until he had to be at the MPE building. That's long enough. He called his book in from system storage and adjusted his knees on the cushion until he was in a comfortable position to study his next spell. It was the cutting one that sent a triangle of magic flying through the air like a dagger. The sharper brother to the square strike. The author recommended that the wizard practice by visiting an orchard that was ripe for harvest to help the workers trim the bounty from high branches. Not for the first time, Alden wondered just how old this book was. The true planets had orchards, and they had to get the fruit down from the top branches somehow. But he assumed that it probably involved technology, not Artonans clambering around in the treetops. Olepta Farm's Marlick Berry facility had been heavily robotized. Hey, what do I know? Maybe there's some kind of magic nut that tastes bad if it's not picked by hand or by spell. The ori flowed between his fingers as he practiced the patterns. Kibby would really like watching me do this. She was always so excited when I got a spell right. I hope she's impressing the hell out of one of her tutors right now. When he practiced for long enough, he blew out his candle and tidied up. Overall, it was a successful wizarding session. All his spells were working for him. It felt good, as always, to stretch his authority out in this way. And the memorization of the new spell had felt natural. He wasn't sure if that was some processing clicking into place for him or if he'd just gotten very used to this kind of studying. He decided his subdued mood was probably a mix of this weekend's level up reminding him that his ability to do magic freely like this was always going to be something he nurtured for a time and then lost for a time. And also a little bit of loneliness. Practicing without a partner was still fun, but there was nobody to share your extraordinary juice pop making powers with. On his way to the gym, hauling his duffel bag full of supplies since Instructor Fragment was still open to him experimenting for the rescue sessions, he looked up a number on the internet. If it was right, there were around 17,000 Artonans on Earth at the moment. The number fluctuated a lot from day to day. Most of them were probably wizards. They were running houses of healing, teaching, being diplomatic, or maintaining magical equipment and facilities. Some of them were long-term residents of Earth. Others were just visiting to complete some quick task. Thousands of wizards, thought Alden. And one human who's just getting started. Line of asterisks. The locker room was rowdy when he entered. Alden. A Scottish voice called excitedly. You'll sing with us, won't you? Finley was already in his gym suit. He was waving a black tablet eagerly at Alden from across the room. Sing? If he's smart, he won't, Winston said. He was tying his shoes over by that brute guy who was always editing his social media pictures to make himself taller than the other people in the photos. We have to start thinking about our internet presence now. Do you want to look marketable or do you want to look like a dork? Finley glared at him. Other people have been doing it. And Jeffy and Con are singing with me. We're going to ask the girls, too. So that rivalry is only getting uglier as time passes, Alden noted. He had no idea what Winston Feather had expected from the hero program. Surely, as an A rank, he hadn't assumed he would be one of the brightest stars in the school. He hadn't even gotten in on the first try. When they'd first met on the bus, Alden had had the impression that Winston was rude, shallow, and not particularly intelligent. And then the guy had developed this weird competitive streak with Finley at the party, before Finley had even noticed him. Did he think he'd be the only speedster in the class? It would have been a ridiculous thing to assume. And he was annoyed everyone was talking about me at the party, too, even though they weren't exactly praising me. Just extreme limelight hunger? Maybe Winston had been super popular back home, and he'd thought he would be here, too. It was Alden's best guess without directly asking him what his problem was, and that sounded like a lot of trouble for a little reward. Finley, Alden said, I don't have any idea what you're talking about, but just so you know, I have a terrible singing voice. So the answer is probably no. It's fine if you sound bad. That'll make it even funnier. I spent all day in class making up Gokarech songs, and we're going to sing them in our gym suits and see if we can go viral. I'm in, said Alden before Finley could draw another breath. Yes. Don't do it without me. I'll be dressed in moments. Hoyu was pulling on his own suit, and at the intensity of Alden's voice, he started laughing. What's so funny? Finley asked. Nothing. Hoyu said. I'll do it too. I want to. The more the merrier. Alden was already in one of the showers, stripping at lightning speed. His desire to go viral, below zero. Definitely in the negative numbers. He'd like to be the opposite of viral forever and ever. However, sacrifices could be made in the interest of having as many humans as possible sing about Gokarech. So that he could see the look on Stuart's single quotaceous face during their next phone call. A few minutes before class started, around 10 of them stood in a group in one of the halls, singing the songs Finley had written in class that day. Alden's personal favorite was set to the tune of Twinkle, Twinkle Little Star, Stinky, Stinky, Gokarech, eat your nest mates as they hatch up above the trees you fly, hunger gleaming in your eye. Alden wasn't the only one with a bad singing voice. An Astrid made the back row flap their arms cannibalistically. It was truly a thing of beauty. Chapter 117 and Jim, they were assigned to new groups. The groupings were more varied than the previous weeks, but other than a deliberate mixing of classes and ranks in each set of 10 students, Alden couldn't tell if there was any reason behind it. His group had 3 S's, 6 A's, and him. Maricel, Jeffy, and a very quiet strength brute named Lucille were their S's. Jerry the Water Shaper, Reinhard the Bowmeister, Everly, Astrid, Hoyu, and Lexi were their A's. This is a significantly more intimidating collection of people to have gym with than last week. It was exciting, too. He'd wanted to see his roommates and Maricel working up close. He'd seen all of Everly's tricks now, but her freezing spells tended to make class a lot more interesting. And chasing Klein just wouldn't be the same without Astrid throwing herself wildly in unexpected directions. This is great, Hoyu said, jogging across the gym between Alden and Lexi toward their first session. I thought we might go all semester without getting to be in the same group. To Alden's surprise, Instructor Marion's hide-and-seek maze was making a reappearance. Though it looked like it was in a new configuration. I was just thinking I was happy about it, too. I'm glad we're getting the maze out of the way to start with. Lexi had rather in a crossbody holster over his unitar today. It's my least favorite. Because you don't like memorizing everyone else's position? Alden asked. Or because you can't use rather? It's because it's a team game, Hoyu whispered loudly. Lexi didn't deny it. Sorry to bring out the maze again so soon, everyone, Instructor Marion said when they'd all gathered. It wasn't supposed to reappear for 2 more weeks, but we've had a change of plans that makes introducing a new activity today less practical. Big Sna, Instructor Waker is going to be leaving for the Triplanets tomorrow, and he'll be gone for at least a week. Astrid made an unhappy sound. She seemed to like Big Snake's teaching style a lot for someone who took just as many tennis balls to the face as anyone else. I understand, said Marion. But Principal Sley will be his replacement. She thinks it would be fun for you all to go ahead and take a crack at the obstacle course race we've put together for the first-year classes who are ahead of yours. We'll be using my usual section of the gym and Instructor Wakers for it. And I know you'll all be excited to hear that it's a team event. Alden accidentally caught Lexi's eye at exactly that moment, and he couldn't help but smile. Marion went on to explain that the obstacle course would be run by 2 competing groups at the same time. And strategic interference with other runners would be allowed. We get a duel. Jeffy sounded energized. Strategic interference isn't really dueling. Instructor Marion examined Jeffy. We'll talk about it on Wednesday. That way the rules will be fresh in your mind. For now let's divide you into teams. Same rules as last time. And remember, no using targeting abilities no matter how tempting it might be. The hide-and-seek maze was a different experience with this group than it had been with Alden's old one. For one thing, half of these people had very superhuman endurance. And they were almost all on the other team, looking chipper and well-oxygenated, while Alden and several other teammates were starting to pant from all the sprinting. Maricel, Jeffy, Lucille, Hoyu, and Reinhard were the hunted in the green vests. And Alden had somehow become the shot caller for the hunters in the red vests. I do know how this happened. I'm just surprised that it did. Astrid had volunteered him for it. Because you're always bossing people around in this game. Like Max. You're good at it. That's not really true, Alden had said. I'm just faster at text messaging than the rest of you, so I end up outputting a lot more information to the group. Comms are important, said Jerry, pulling one of her legs back in the thigh stretch. I want to win. When I'm focused on hunting a particular person, I forget where everyone else is, Everly said. Lexi, what do you think? Alden asked. I don't give other people instructions for this kind of thing unless I'm 100% sure about them, so if I tell any of you to do something, I expect you to do it. The other three looked irritated. How would a good roommate translate that for him? I think what Lexi means, in his heart, is that he would rather not take a strong advice-giving position on the team, but when he does give advice, he hopes we'll trust his judgment. That's what I said. So we're all in it together. Alden had announced. I'll try to keep the other team's positioning in mind. Please take a couple of seconds to text when you change your own positions or you spot a green vest. And now he was stuck as the leader. But because he wasn't great at remembering where all the other players were at any given second, he was focusing particularly hard on a weakness they had discovered in the other team. Jeffy would follow bait. Alden almost couldn't believe it when Jerry had said she had made the Aqua Brute go down a corridor by leaving a trail of water drops on the floor. He followed them? He didn't run away from them. When one of the hunted got spotted, Alden's team stole one of their points. If Jeffy thought Jerry was in an area, he should have fled, not headed toward her. Doing the brain work meant Alden wasn't running quite as much himself. At the moment, he was occupying a spot beside a pyramidal obstacle. Hoyu should be in the area, and from here, Alden might catch a glimpse of him. He followed, and Jerry confirmed. I had left the water there because I didn't want him to use that path. I was planning to catch him somewhere else. But then he didn't show up in the place I expected and Lexi got that point from him instead. A minute ago, Lexi had spotted Jeffy trying to hide between two cube-shaped obstacles on the other side of the maze. "Does anyone have ears on him right now?" Alden asked. That nobody had eyes on him was a given. Their point tally would have gone up, and the spotter would have reported the location. "I have ears on someone who walks heavy," said Everly. "We're both in Column Forest right now. It's probably one of the boys if it's not a trick of some kind." Column Forest had become its name at some point. It was a small area full of tall body-wide columns with just enough space in between them for a person to pass through. It was a favorite hiding spot for the hunted and an annoying portion of the maze for the hunters. "Hoyu should be near me." He and Reinhard both have their shoes off and they know to sneak when they're in tight spots instead of corridors, Alden said. "If you can hear them clearly, it's got to be Jeffy." "It's him then." "All right," thought Alden. "What's the most efficient way to use him before the other team realizes we're using him?" After the hunters spotted someone, they had to close their eyes and count down to give the person they'd caught repositioning time. And whenever someone was in countdown mode, Alden's team had a blind spot on the map that the other team could use. Multiple people counting down at the same time meant they lost control of too much territory and their prey ran wild. So all of them just converging on Jeffy in a trap was no good. Why did he follow the water? He must want to help his team out by location reporting on someone, Alden texted. It was what made the most sense. Jeffy wanted to sneak up on a hunter without being spotted in return so that he could tell his teammates where the enemy was. The hunted earned points passively by running away and not being seen. Jeffy probably didn't like the role as much as the more proactive feeling hunter position. A point came in suddenly, and a moment later Astrid inflicted one of her mental texts on the group. "I caught. Dirt girl. Counting. Edge. Here fast. Think trees." Alden had gotten so used to translating for her last week that he just did it without waiting to find out if people had understood or not. She spotted Maricel near the perimeter of her zone, and hears her running away fast. She's counting now. She thinks Maricel is going toward Column Forest with you, Everly. "Yes." Astrid agreed. "Lexi, can you cover your zone and Jerry's?" Alden asked. "Not perfectly." Alden rolled his eyes. Lexi's approach to hunting was aggressive, effective, and very like him. He had memorized several different routes through his section that would provide him with full visibility, assigned them numbers, and he had a randomizer website pulled up on his interface telling him which route to run next when he completed one so that there wouldn't be a pattern for the hunter to pick up on. He'd been running constantly since the beginning of class, and nobody left his zone alive, which meant nobody had hidden in his zone for most of the game. "I think it would be okay if you were a little less perfect while you covered a larger area. Jerry, could you go pick up Jeffy and lead him around for us? We'll take turns stealing points from him until he gives up on chasing you. If we stagger it out enough, the other team might think it's bad luck that he keeps getting caught instead of realizing it's a scheme." A point came in. Jerry replied, counting down. "Lucille. Toward you, Lexi. I'll get Jeffy next." They gained another point as Lucille was spotted by Lexi. A flicker of movement on the periphery of Alden's vision caught his attention, and he spun around just in time to see Hoyu trying to creep out from behind the pyramid. Alden pointed at him triumphantly, and Hoyu winced. "You're so mean," Hoyu texted him a few seconds later while he was counting down. "You're not even breathing hard," Alden told him. "Run faster." Not long after that, their first Jeffy point came in as Jerry lured him to Astrid. Excited. "Bloodhound," Astrid said. Alden, racing through his zone on what he hoped would be a surprise course for any hiding green vests, had no idea what it meant. "Astrid, if it's important information, using your fingers to text is good. It doesn't have to be mental all the time. I finger text sometimes. Rarely." "Jeffy looks really excited. Like a bloodhound chasing a scent trail," said Astrid. "That's good," thought Alden. "Great work, Jerry." She didn't answer. But a second later he heard footsteps, and the water shaper dashed through the intersection he was approaching with a look of concentration on her face. Their eyes barely met as she spilled a little water out of the drinking bottles she'd carried into the maze just in case I think of something to do with them. Maricel had brought in the big bag of potting soil she liked to work with in class, too. It would make it possible for her to move through the air with 0 footsteps, but hauling it around, even telekinetically, must have been too slow. She'd abandoned it. Alden had wondered how useful the water bottle would be, since Jerry couldn't levitate herself with it and they weren't allowed to attack other players. Baiting someone with it had never occurred to him. He tried to give her a thumbs up, but she was already rushing away. Isn't she going a little fast? He wondered as he hid behind a corner to wait for his Shaper-delivered victim to appear. It wasn't like Jeffy would be running after her. He was trying to sneak up on. Pounding footsteps interrupted his thoughts, and a mohawk sporting aqua brute appeared, jogging with his eyes fixed on the ground. Jeffy was grinning. As he spotted the water splatter Jerry had left, his face brightened even more. And his pace picked up. Alden took a point for his team, and he didn't see me. Jeffy's jog was approaching a run. The lost point didn't seem to faze him at all. Alden didn't think he even knew he was the one who'd lost his team the point. Jerry. Go faster. He's gaining on you. Alden closed his eyes for the required number of seconds. What do you mean he's gaining on her? Lexi asked. You guys, Jeffy's focused on chasing Jerry. He might have forgotten he is not a hunter. Don't let him see you when you take your point from him. He can't be that, another point. Never mind. He's definitely forgotten, Lexi said. Astrid, come this way a little. Everly got a point from Maricel finally in the column forest. Can't I have some Jeffy points? The next time Alden saw Jerry she was sprinting flat out, and she only paused for long enough to pick up the water she'd left behind last time so that she could throw it in a slightly different location. The highlight of the whole game, in his opinion, came 2 minutes and quite a few points later when he heard Reinhard bellow, "What do you mean you caught her? You're not supposed to be catching anyone." Another point. Me. Astrid texted. Loud shout. I found. Line of asterisks in rescue. Instructor fragment at them excavating water balloons from an impressive mound of wood, rubble, and broken appliances. It required concentration and careful application of powers, since mistakes would lead to collapses that crushed the victims. They were allowed to work alone or in groups today. Alden was saving poor injured balloons left and right. Lexi, tell me to pick up that piece of particle board, he said, indicating the one he had chosen. Lexi was looking down at his third smashed balloon. He used Mindbreather very well when he was slicing something down to size so that he could move it more easily, or when he was pulling sturdy, medium-sized objects out of the pile. But it wasn't good for heavy lifting, and when he tried to pluck trapped balloons out of the mess directly, they always popped. He kept trying, though. He seemed very concerned about his delicacy with the tool. Grab the particle board, Astrid said helpfully. She was extracting what looked like half of a recliner. Alden changed targets. Tell me again, please, Astrid. Take the board. The board was underneath a mound of bricks. Checking his footing to make sure he wasn't standing on anything too precarious, Alden grabbed the board by the edge, preserved it, and lifted. The bricks all came with it, riding on top. He walked backward, careful not to tilt the heavy load. It was satisfying to dump it all in his personal rubble mound, then dive back in to save the balloon he'd uncovered. It was barely visible, still trapped in a crevice under a heavy slab of concrete with twisted pieces of rebar sticking out. Astrid, do you mind? Rescue that pink dying man. The balloon was pink. And it was one of the really big ones that had been overfilled so that it would burst more easily. Alden shoved his arm in, grabbed, and preserved. When he got the balloon to the exit, though, he realized he had a problem. Pink dying man, you're too chubby to escape this way. Well, it's not like you'll pop. As long as I don't lose focus on protecting you. Deliberately hitting things with his preserved burdens could be iffy. He assumed that yanking them through a crack they shouldn't fit through would be similarly iffy, though he'd never actually tried this particular move. He closed his eyes and concentrated. I'm willingly bearing the weight of this water balloon. I want to keep it safe from damage. Me dragging it out from under a big pile of heavy stuff and letting it scrape against some things on the top and bottom is part of that. Moving all the heavy junk on top of it piece by piece would be another option, but it would be a less educational one. Alden got into a crouch and gave the chubby balloon an experimental pull. His preservation held, but the rubble didn't budge. It seemed to be wedged tightly together. Maybe if I get my hand underneath the balloon and try to use more of a lifting motion to move the stuff on top. He tried, only to have to stop immediately. The concrete slab had shifted, and its shifting had made a much larger quantity of rubble move and slide than Alden had anticipated. He didn't know how many balloons he might crush if the pile collapsed. Are you really going to use the people you're saving that way in the future? Lexi asked. I have no idea what you mean, Alden lied. Besides, if I was trapped and a hero with my skill came along to save me, I'd be completely fine with them using my preserved body as a lever or a carrying device. Maybe he is going to go for one of those dark hero personas. Reinhardt called from the other side of the pile. He'll rescue you from the villain and then turn around and block the villain's spells with your face. Is that real? Maricel asked. She was working with Lucille, moving ground element obstacles with her telekinesis while the quiet girl moved everything else. Their collection of saved balloons was growing fast. People being heroes like that? They are not very common, said Jerry. Too controversial. I noticed this last week. You don't actually know much about superheroes, do you, Maricel? Reinhardt said. The large, pale stone she was moving dropped suddenly, and Lucille caught it with a grunt before it could hit the cache of balloons they were trying to save. One-handed. Fine, thought Alden, raising an eyebrow at the girl as Maricel frantically apologized. Be epic like that. He wasn't sure he could have even made a boulder that size wobble without getting something coated in his magic underneath it. He wondered how she compared to Heloisa, a rank below her. Lexi had come over to examine Alden's problem rescue from closer up. His whip was in his hand. Do you want me to try to cut a wider opening? That sounds like a good plan. I can keep the balloon preserved so if anything falls on it it'll still be safe. I might hit your hand, Lexi warned. That's what the gym suits are for. I might hit the balloon. That's what I'm for. Ruther's thin chain lengthened and started to glow. Lexi backed up a few steps. He's backing up? Alden had assumed they were going for a close-range, delicate operation. Hold still, said Lexi. He's going to really swing it. Alden tensed. Even though the pain setting on the gym was low again today, he still remembered what it felt like to be grabbed around the waist and stabbed through the leg by that thing during combat assessment. And that hadn't been its full potency either. Lexi moved. Alden's eyes weren't fast enough to make out the whip as anything but a blur of light, but there was a loud crack and some of the concrete around his hands crumbled. Ruther phased out. A thin slice of concrete and iron fell forward onto Alden's forearms. It was heavy, but not enough to injure him. His whip cut right through all of that, Alden thought as he lifted the water balloon free of the expanded gap. Well, that's neat. Once again, he was convinced that the gym group he'd been assigned to last time had been made up of the least scary members of the class. During the brief mid-class break, Alden set himself up for defense. Is that the shield of the day? Hoyu asked, leaning over him curiously. Yep. Alden had learned last week that if he tried to shield his whole body, Big Snake just threw more balls at him harder. It fatigued him faster so that he couldn't try out as many things in the next sessions, and hiding behind a magic wall for 30 minutes was lazy anyway. So his shield was going to be a more sporting size today. Shoulder-to-hip coverage was what he was going for. I thought a paracord zigzag would be easy to make fast even in an emergency, so I wanted to try it. He laid the cord out on the floor in the zigzag pattern, making sure that it was a little wider than his body and that the gaps were all narrow enough to prevent him from getting hit by Snake's preferred ammunition, while still providing enough visibility if he raised it in front of his own face. When he was done, he unwound some more of the olive green paracord cord from the spool he was using and tied himself a handle. 1 minute shield. he announced, lifting it up to show it off. "It was closer to 2 minutes," said Lexi from his seat on the bleachers nearby. "I timed you. That was so helpful of you." "Thank you." "I bet I could shoot through it," Reinhardt said. He was using some kind of spell on the tips of his arrows before stuffing them back in his quiver. "You have arrows, not tennis balls. I would make a shield with smaller gaps to handle you." Big Snake was in the same boisterous mood he'd been in last week, despite the fact that he'd soon be leaving for some kind of assignment. He did up the difficulty of their game, though. Alden wasn't sure if the instructor had always planned to increase the challenge, or if being in a higher-powered group of classmates was what made the difference. Reinhardt's bow was no good for this, but he had fast reflexes and excellent vision. He was dodging well. Lexi was also great at dodging, though he seemed to have chosen not to. Instead, he was trying to use her as a blocking device with his mental control. "He's totally trying to make his own version of the zigzag shield with the chain," Alden thought as he ducked his head and lifted his paracord to block a ball. He decided he was flattered. Lexi was getting hit a lot, by balls and also by pieces of balls that had been sliced by the whip as they came in. Hoyu's tactic was to slap incoming balls out of the air with hands protected by the boxing glove skill. And Maricel and Jerry both had element shields up. Rather than choosing to use a rock or one of the sandbags, Maricel was focusing on compressing and moving free soil. At Earthbox earlier this afternoon, she'd seen someone making a wedge shape, and she was trying to use one of her own to redirect the projectiles. It was working well. A flashing dot at the bottom left of Alden's vision let him know the timer he'd set had just gone off. They now had around 5 minutes left in this session. "If I'm going to try it, now's the time." He'd wanted to attempt something last week, but he thought it might involve a lot of failure, so he'd elected to wait until Instructor Waker had seen him using his skill in the more obvious way. He was sure now that he wouldn't look like he was phoning it in, and Big Snake wouldn't mind him flailing around as long as he seemed to have a plan. He repelled one ball with his shield, stepped over a dirty one that had just ricocheted off Maricel's soil wedge, and focused on Snake. The man was smiling and calling out praise to Jerry, who'd finally managed to get enough water in the air in front of a ball to keep it from bursting through and hitting her anyway. Alden flexed the part of his authority that was in charge of targeting and focused on the instructor. His sense of a pull toward Hoyu, off to the right and behind him, disappeared. His shield collapsed into a tangle of cord at his feet. He no longer felt his authority protecting his second, secret object, the breath mint he'd been preserving in his stomach to make sure he tired out at a reasonable rate for someone who had a potent level 4 skill instead of a potent level 8 one. "It's 9 now," he corrected himself. "You hit skill fatigue, Alden," Big Snake shouted. "Better get ready to run." Alden wouldn't be running. Just get your hands on the ball. He'd caught things Joe had thrown. He'd caught things Kibby had thrown. The problem was that Joe and Kibby were throwing those things to him, not at him. Of course Alden had wondered if he could snatch an incoming projectile. But retargeting meant he was powerless until his target gave him permission to hold something, so it was a risk to drop shields and go for it. Was someone sending objects his way with intent to injure giving him permission to hold them? Maybe. If he thought about it right. "I promise to keep anything Big Snake throws at me safe until it leaves my protection again." A tennis ball smashed into his knee before he could get his fingers near it, making the joint ache and sting. Irritated with himself, Alden chased the ball down. Those were the rules for ones that hit his body instead of the shield. The ones that didn't burst anyway. Not all of the balls were rated for superhuman use, and even though Instructor Waker wasn't using anything close to his full strength, some of them blew apart at the seams when they impacted. Alden captured the runaway and tossed it back in Snake's direction. The instructor snatched it out of the air with his left hand while he flung 3 balls at once toward Lexi with his right. Alden refocused his attention on his plan. "All right. This might take a lot of tries, and it might not work, and everyone's going to think I'm weird. Who cares? Get the next one." He watched the hero closely. Instructor Waker was trying his. Alden didn't know what to call it. Sometimes he scooped a pile of balls out of the bin with both enormous arms and sent them flying toward the ceiling, then he kicked and punched them all joyfully at his fleeing students. Reign of Terror! Reinhard shouted, lifting his bow and shooting one of the airborne balls. I guess we could call it that. Alden crouched and held his hands up in front of his chest. He splayed his fingers wide. He tried to pay attention to Big Snake's motions and also that sense of something almost like weight that he experienced when he had a target. Like the world tilted slightly in the other person's direction. He's my target. He's the one who can entrust me with stuff. Anything he throws at me is meant for me. The balls were coming down. If Joe's perception lessons are going to come in handy, now would be the swing of a massive arm at an angle that his brain said was dangerous. Where? And then he was toppling forward, unexpectedly thrown off balance by the sudden motion of his own body, and in his right hand, he was preserving the tennis ball. His palm didn't sting at all. Got the ball. Didn't kill the momentum. Alden thought excitedly as he knelt on the gym floor. He could feel his skill protecting it. How did I catch that? The ball had come in low. It would have struck his ankle. But there had never been an instant where he consciously thought, it's going to hit low. Just reflex. Probably. It probably only felt like something mysterious had happened because it had been so fast and not enough thought could take place. And yet, that was a really great catch. Look what I did. Literally nobody was looking at him. Not even Big Snake. Oh, come on. He was sure it just looked like he'd gotten lucky and stopped the ball with his hands instead of the rest of his body. But this was so much more than that. A singed chunk of tennis ball bounced off his shoulder from Lexi's direction, and Alden looked over at his roommate, beaming. Lexi was wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his sleeve, and Ruther's gleaming chain was undulating in the air around him. He caught sight of Alden and blinked. Ruther undulated faster. Are you okay? Lexi asked. I caught a ball. I see that. Why are you on the floor hugging the ball you caught? Did he get hit in the head? Jeffy called from behind them. He did sound concerned, so Alden couldn't be too offended. Dirt spattered them all as Maricel's wedge took a strong strike directly to the tip. Big Snake's follow-up shot smashed into her stomach, and she yelped. Leaving her dirt on the floor, she chased after the ball. I would be happy, too, if I caught one of these things. She shouted. Let him enjoy it. Thanks, Maricel. Alden jumped up. No. I really caught it, he said to Lexi, who was still watching him. Look. He considered the ball for a second more, rotating it until it pointed in the direction he wanted, then he let it rest flat on his palm. He stretched out his arm toward the instructor, smiled, and dropped preservation. The tennis ball shot back toward Big Snake with all the power of the hero's own throw. Alden's aim wasn't the best. It would have gone over Snake's head if he hadn't jumped to catch it. But the speed. It hit his hand with such a satisfying thwop. There was a sudden pause in the activity. Lucille, standing as close to the instructor as they were allowed to, looked around to see who had returned the ball that fast. Hoyu, too. Everly, who had been collecting a trio of balls and had missed what happened, started to throw them back then stopped as Big Snake pointed at Alden. Hey! He said in an enthusiastic voice that echoed across the gym. I think I know what that was. Let's see that again. Alden was thrilled. And then he was taking a tennis ball to the collarbone. Gotta stay alert. Big Snake called as Alden cursed in his head and ran after it. If you're gonna play the game that way outside of the gym, it's not safe to miss one. Over the course of the final few minutes of defense, Alden missed 5 balls and caught one more that had been aimed directly at his chest. As the signal flashed indicating their session shift, Big Snake waved him over. You know you could do that? The hero asked as he plucked damaged projectiles out of his bin and tossed them with uncanny accuracy into a separate recycling container behind him. Get a hold of things with that skill of yours that maybe your target didn't mean for you to keep? I knew I could take advantage of people being non-specific when they told me to pick something up, and I can make use of them being clueless about the fact that they're my entrusters when they hand me objects, Alden said. I wasn't sure about something like this. Weapons heading at you are meant for you but not in the same way. Skills are funny things. Big Snake was still sorting through the bin. Gotta learn what they're meant to be without boxing him in. Or that's my opinion, which I'm supposed to tell you is only my opinion, since everyone figures themselves out differently. Some people are analyzers. Others are feelers. I know a few successful levelers who consider themselves explorers. Set out to discover something new about what the system has given them every day. He looked down at Alden. Anyhow, you've had your skill longer than the other kids here, and you've used it for things more serious than gym class. Yes, Alden agreed after a brief hesitation. That's true. Leveled it a few times, too, Big Snake said. Can you tell when you're on the verge of getting the hang of a new trick? I'm not sure. Sometimes. You think half an hour more of me attacking you might help you grab hold of it? Alden looked at him in surprise. I think it might. It definitely couldn't hurt. Except for my body. And my pride. Big Snake laughed so loudly that all other sound in the gym stopped for a second. Well, now people are wondering what's going on. Yeah. Instructor Waker said. I don't like to send you off when you're just getting your first look at something. If you're not dying to go have a stab at Torsten, stay in my section here for another round of defense training. Just join in with the next group. That sounded ideal. Thank you. If you don't mind. Throwing things at 11 people isn't any harder than throwing things at 10. He lifted an arm and waved across the gym at Instructor Klein. Alden assumed the faculty had some mental texting going on, since the wave alone didn't seem to be enough to convey information. Klein stared at Alden for a moment, then he nodded stoically at Snake. Great. The huge man grinned at Alden. Now let's talk about how to make the most of it. Line of asterisks. The new group Alden joined contained Winston, and they had just come from Instructor Marion's session, which was probably why half of them looked dead on their feet. The hunting game favored fast people. Winston was swaggering a little. Last week, he and Finley had been in the same group, so Instructor Marion would have been able to split them between the two teams. Maybe that's part of the reason Winston still got such an issue with him, Alden thought, crossing the floor toward the position Big Snake had told him to take. Direct competition between the two speedsters in the maze would have been just a step below sticking them on a track and watching Finley lap the rank over and over. Mehdi was a step ahead of Vandy as the group reached Alden. His normally immaculate hair was a mess, and he was holding his side like he had a stitch. What are you doing over here? He asked when he spotted Alden. More defense. Big Snake said I should stay to work on something. Vandy looked curious. Mehdi brightened. We'll get to go head-to-head. Watch me, and I'll show you how an agility brute can move. Thanks. But I'm going to be kind of busy watching Instructor Waker. Mehdi opened his mouth. Let's see which B rank has to chase the most balls. Winston interrupted. Max was bringing up the rear of the group. As always by the end of gym, he was walking like his legs hurt, and he was so drenched, he looked like he'd been swimming. Alden frowned at Winston. Max doesn't have to chase many. He sets up zones to slow or stop them. Max glanced at him and shook his head. Spell impressions are mostly done for the day. I've used almost all of my casts. Oh, sorry. Max shrugged. I guess you and I could compete, Winston said to Alden. Then he gave one of the girls in his group a smile, as though he'd said something hilarious. I'm too busy for whatever his issues are, thought Alden. But then again, if you want to compete to see who is to chase the most balls, Winston, let's do it, Alden said. Sounds awesome. Max raised an eyebrow at him. All right. Big Snake called. Get ready. You know how this works. Winston jogged toward the front. What are you doing agreeing to his challenge? Max asked quietly, taking a position near Alden. You don't usually take him seriously. I'm not taking him seriously. You'll see. He thinks he was being so funny suggesting we compete. A dull black line in the shape of a semicircle appeared on the floor around Alden. Everyone, Alden's practicing something specific right now. He's got a barrier behind him so that he doesn't have to chase after the balls, Big Snake announced. "It's transparent so it won't affect visibility for any of you. Don't cross the line on the floor or you'll run into it." Winston whipped around to stare at Alden. "See?" Alden murmured to Max. "I'm funny, too." One corner of Max's mouth turned up. "You know he'll say that's not what he meant." "I don't care." Alden crouched and held his arms up, fingers splayed. He focused his attention on Instructor Waker. "I've got things to do." Line of asterisks. So many tennis balls pelted Alden so quickly that multiple parts of his body were always stinging from the suit's pen mimicry. But there was something here, knocking on the door of his mind, waiting to be understood. Every time another ball flew at him, he grew a little more immersed in what he was doing. With no need to run or dodge, the sights and sounds of the gymnasium faded. He tuned out his classmates. He focused. And focused again. Deeper. He was attentive in a way he associated more with spellcasting than with using his avowed powers. He didn't know how he'd gotten here, but now that he was, he trusted the feeling. At some point, it stopped mattering altogether that the tennis ball was a weapon aimed at him. Thinking of it that way was wrong. Too complicated. An object left Morris and Waker's hand and flew toward Alden Thorne. No, that was still too complicated. An object flew toward the bearer of all burdens from his entruster's hand. That was closer. Not perfect, for some reason, but much closer. And the more Alden tried to hold onto that idea, the more he tried to meet it with himself, the more natural catching the incoming balls became. They were still too fast. Too hard. Thrown at the most awkward parts of his body with the most awkward timing no matter what position he was in. He couldn't see them coming properly, and he missed so many of them. But sometimes his hands would wrap around one before he even realized he'd reached for it. And the more he did it, the more he doubted that it was just reflex. When it happened, in the instant he captured the ball, the skill felt alive inside him. There was no particular twist or fold of the affixation that he suddenly activated, no burden-catching button he could find. It was both more total and more subtle than that. And though his body moved without conscious direction, it didn't feel at all like the robotic takeover that happened whenever he used his haunting sphere spell impression. What is this exactly? What are we doing? It was a shame his own skill couldn't talk back to him because this felt really important. That moment when I'm casting a spell with my Ariad, the moment when it feels like reality parts to make way for me. That feeling Bo called self-affirmation and a success high rolled up into one. This feels more like that than using the skill usually does. He caught. He caught. He caught. 3 in a row. He was still sending them back to his instructor, but though the high-speed return had been so exciting earlier, the catching was more important than the releasing right now. Then, the pitches stopped coming. For a long moment, Alden waited, still ready. The sounds of the gymnasium, so loud and startling, intruded on him very suddenly. They were followed by the urgency of his own need for air, his heaving chest, his body. Did someone change the settings on my gym suit? Why does everything hurt this much? The ground around his feet was littered with tennis balls. He was supposed to pick them up. He bent in half at the waist, and his back protested. He straightened with a ball in his hand, feeling like he'd just managed something Herculean by not swearing out loud. Max was walking back from the ball bin, the expression on his face thoughtful as he regarded Alden. He wasn't the only one staring. Maddie was frowning at him. Vandy looked like she was trying to x-ray him with her eyes. Alden suddenly realized he didn't have any idea what he looked like from the outside. He had no clue how many balls he'd caught or if he'd returned them all properly. He didn't know how many had hit him. His aching lungs and strained muscles said he hadn't been holding still. I just hope I wasn't talking to my own skill out loud. Instructor Waker was waving him over. He went, trying not to stumble over his feet. Hated to stop throwing at you when you seemed to be catching on to catching. But class is over, and you looked like you were about to pass out. I'd never hear the end of it from the principal if you did. Thanks, said Alden, getting the word out between breaths, for the extra time. I'd ask if you thought it had helped, but I don't need to. Did I? He had more than one question. None of them were easy to ask. Did I look like I was having a meaningful experience with a sense no other human possesses? Did I return the ones I caught in the correct direction? The instructor chuckled. Not sure, huh? I thought not. You were doing good, kid. Lots of improvement. Your footage would be in your inbox, same as always. You should give it a watch. Tobe continued.